All right, let's jump right into this explainer of 1 Corinthians. We're unpacking Paul's absolutely profound letter to an ancient church that was struggling with serious division, intense cultural pressures, and honestly, a really messy faith. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by modern cultural pressures, or you've wrestled with how exactly faith is supposed to fit into everyday, complicated life, you're going to see why this ancient text remains so incredibly relevant for us today. This was a church that literally had it all: big personalities, huge issues, and a massive need for guidance. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the ancient city of chaos. Second, Paul's unique interactive letter. Third, factions, morals, and freedom. Fourth, love, gifts, and the resurrection. And finally, wisdom for the modern world.
So, Section 1. The ancient city of chaos. Literally, the Las Vegas of the ancient world.
Paul's history with this city kicks off around AD 50. You gotta picture this place. It's strategically located in Greece, flushed with wealth, and an absolute melting pot of cultures. It was the ancient world's Las Vegas. The skyline was literally dominated by pagan temples to gods like Aphrodite, complete with all the temple prostitution you'd expect. So Paul gets there on his second missionary journey, stays for about 18 months, and somehow manages to plant a highly diverse church. We're talking Jews, Gentiles, slaves, and free citizens, all worshiping in the exact same room. That diversity was awesome, but it was also a massive challenge. Fast forward a few years. Paul is hanging out in Ephesus, and he gets some incredibly troubling reports. The church he planted has basically descended into chaos, so he grabs his pen to sort it out.
Moving on to Section 2, Paul's unique interactive letter, a dialogue, not just a sermon.
What's really fascinating here is Paul's method. You can actually feel his personality jumping off the page. He's not just coldly laying down a bunch of rigid rules, he engages directly with their specific issues. Get this, he literally quotes their own cultural slogans right back to them. In chapter 6, he cites their little catchphrase, "Everything is permissible for me," which they were clearly using to justify some pretty bad behavior. And then Paul sharply counters it saying, "But not everything is beneficial." It instantly turns the text from a stuffy, one-sided sermon into this vibrant, punchy dialogue.
So Paul has this structured threefold game plan. Step 1, he's got to address how they're splintering into all these little factions. Step 2, he has to confront some deeply severe moral failures, including believers suing each other and a genuinely shocking case of incest. And Step 3, he needs to clear up their massive doctrinal confusion around marriage, food sacrifice to idols, spiritual gifts, and the resurrection. He's showing them exactly how to practically live out their faith in a seriously messy world. Which brings us to Section 3, Factions, Morals, and Freedom, navigating the core issues. Paul systematically wades through the chaos here. He starts off focusing on unity in chapters 1 through 4. Then he pivots to moral purity in chapter 5, specifically dealing with that scandalous situation with the stepmother, making it clear that sin has to be confronted for the community to actually stay healthy. From there, he tackles Christian freedom in chapters 8 through 10, before moving into love and spiritual gifts, and ultimately building up to the resurrection in chapter 15.
Let's zoom in on that unity piece. The church was deeply divided. People were running around forming little tribal factions, claiming loyalty to specific human leaders. You had people saying, well, I follow Paul or I follow Apollos. Paul has to firmly remind them that Christ is the true foundation, not the messengers. And here's a brilliant detail. Paul uses the imagery of the Corinthians being God's temple, built on the foundation of Jesus. Think about the context. That specific imagery would have hit so hard in a city where the skyline was entirely dominated by massive, towering pagan temples.
Then we hit this really tricky tension regarding Christian freedom. The hot-button issue in Corinth was, can Christians eat meat that's been sacrificed to idols? Paul gives this beautifully nuanced answer. He says technically, yes, you have the freedom to do that. But he heavily balances that technical freedom with community responsibility. If exercising your personal freedom causes someone else in your community to stumble, then you just shouldn't do it. He prioritizes the health of the community way above personal liberty. All right, Section 4, Love, Gifts, and Resurrection. This is the heart and absolute climax of the letter.
In chapters 12 through 14, Paul makes it clear that while spiritual gifts are great, they are totally meaningless if you aren't using them in love. And that brings us to the famous chapter 13. We hear this read at weddings all the time, right? But Paul meant it as something so much heavier. It's not just pretty poetry for a ceremony. It is a rigorous, demanding call to live out selfless, Christ-like love every single day. For Paul, love is the absolute non-negotiable foundation for everything else they're trying to do.
And then we reach chapter 15, the massive theological climax defending the resurrection of Jesus. Now check this out. Paul references over 500 witnesses who saw Jesus alive post-resurrection. This is a massive historical detail. It makes 1 Corinthians one of the earliest written testimonies to the resurrection we have. These accounts were circulating out there long before the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were even written down.
Just a super quick side note on the structure before we talk modern application. Some critics have occasionally suggested that 1 Corinthians might actually be a bunch of smaller letters stitched together. But honestly, most scholars completely agree that its cohesive themes and that back-and-forth interactive flow we just looked at make perfect sense as one single unified document.
Finally, Section 5, Wisdom for the Modern World. Applying this ancient text today.
This text poses a really challenging question for us right now. Are we putting personal preferences above the gospel? It challenges us to pursue unity in our own highly divided world, forcing us to ask if we're prioritizing our own comfort over our common ground in Christ. It's a massive call to live with integrity. Whether in our relationships, our work, or how we handle our freedoms, our lives are supposed to reflect holiness, just like Paul was pushing the Corinthians to do.
If you're hungry to dig even deeper into the cultural insights and theology of Corinth, there are some phenomenal resources out there. Gordon D. Fee's book is a brilliant, accessible commentary. Kenneth E. Bailey offers some amazing cultural context that really brings the text to life. If you want something super scholarly, the Anchor Yale Bible Commentary is comprehensive, and F.F. Bruce is fantastic for historical background. Or if you want a structured deep dive, J. Thomas put together a really solid 12-week study.
And that sets the stage perfectly for next time, when we're going to unpack 2 Corinthians. In that follow-up letter, Paul gets even more personal, opening up about his own struggles and showing us how to find genuine strength in our weaknesses.
But for now, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this provocative thought. 1 Corinthians reminds us that it's not about just being right or being the most spiritually gifted. In a world that is every bit as messy, complicated, and divided as ancient Corinth, how will you ensure that selfless love remains the foundation of everything you do today?